Okay, hello everyone. I'm Richard Herskowitz, the Artistic and Executive Director of the Ashland Independent Film Festival, and we're here following the screening of the short films of Tom Kalin. Tom Kalin is here. He is the recipient of this year's Pride Award. Yesterday we showed his classic feature film Swoon. Today, the short films. And to conduct and moderate the Q&A with him, we're lucky to have gotten Suzie Silver, who is a media artist. She is a professor in the School of Art at Carnegie Mellon, and she and Tom have been friends since they were in grad school together in the 80s at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. So I will turn off my camera and leave it now to Suzie. Take it away.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Richard. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Suzie. Nice to see you.
Great to see you. So it was so wonderful to be able to see all these films together again. Just really gave me so much pleasure, and there's so much to talk about. So let's get started. I'd like to start with the very first video from the air. Because there's a few things I'm interested in there. One is the use of found footage, and then also it just seemed so prescient for the time we're living at right now. Especially, I got a chill when I heard the line, "There is no pilot." That just really seems to summarize the last few months or whatever in this country. So.
Yes, we live in America, the land of no pilot. Horrifying. Maybe to tell you a little context about that piece, I have a long-term collaborator named Thomas Bartlett. He records under the name of Dove Man, and he sometimes contributes or has music released by None Such Records. Mandy Patinkin had recorded for many, many years with None Such, recording with an accompanist, another pianist that wasn't Thomas. And when that accompanist retired, Bob Hurwitz, who runs None Such Records, connected Thomas and Mandy together. And that launched a collaboration between the two of them, where Thomas got Mandy to record all kinds of music that's quite unusual for Mandy. You know, Mandy's very famous for having recorded very notable musical numbers, you know, recording Stephen Sondheim's music or appearing in plays like Evita, but not so much for covering the music of Laurie Anderson. So they covered this incredible track of Laurie Anderson, and it was a kind of revelation to hear Mandy in this context. And I got invited to make a piece. It was a surprise for Mandy that I wanted to make something that he wouldn't appear in, because he was, you know, his initial idea, of course, was that I would film him. And I said, no, I want to just use the recording and use other footage. So yeah, the starting point of that was to think about how the past was prologue, and to think about how, you know, the history from this earlier period of the nuclear scare, or, you know, the fears of the 50s and 60s were so relevant to now. And that brought me to look for archival footage. One of the funny things is that because Mandy was on the show Homeland when we were shooting it, in order to get the drone footage, he actually connected me with people from the Department of State and the Defense Department. So, you know, I had some crazy like government link in order to download those drone strike things, which are actually real declassified CIA and FBI shots of drone strikes of Americans in another country. So yeah, I think there was a way of trying to weave together footage from mostly the 50s and early 60s with footage looking at the kind of refugee crisis, the global refugee crisis, and try to take Laurie Anderson's song as a kind of commentary on the world we're living in, on the very scary world we're living in right now.
Yeah, so yeah, there's so much we could talk about there just on that piece, but I'd like to sort of talk about your work a little bit more broadly, especially how all these films connect together, because even though they've been made over many years, the oldest piece going back to the early 90s, or was it late 80s?
89, yeah.
89, that's 89, right.
Exactly.
89, so going back to 89 for the Air Loss Division altogether is, you know, there are some consistent threads that sort of weave through this entire body of work. And I'd say that that includes the use of found images and sounds, and the idea of like the quotation almost, both visually and sonically, and the way you use text too in your work. And also just the way you make connections between sound and image, and across sort of time and space, the way you use shifts in time with time lapse and combining contemporary footage with old footage. I think these kinds of temporal and jumps, and the way you bring the editing together is so powerful. And it'd be great if you could talk about that a little bit.
Thank you so much. It's such a great and articulate and focused question, and one I think that actually touches on a lot of what we have in common as a history, because we were both trained as artists, in the early 80s. I met you, Suzie, while I was in graduate school in Chicago in the middle 1980s, and you had previously been studying performance and video art separate. My training in graduate school, I actually was getting a degree in photography. And so the time that I was studying photography was a very critical moment. I later studied with people like Barbara Kruger, whose work was based on the appropriation of photographs, often from the 50s and 60s, to reveal the underlying power structures or gender roles that were encoded in these photographs. So, I came of age in a time where I had a kind of very schizophrenic feeling. On the one hand, I wanted to make a beautiful photograph myself. I wanted to experience something in the real world and have a decisive moment and snap the shutter and experience something in front of my lens. But at the same time, I realized that photography was a different art form than painting or sculpture, and that it had an ability to interact and comment on reality in a different way. And that, artists like Barbara Kruger or Sherry Levine in the early and mid 80s, or Richard Prince, for instance, were appropriating photographs. Right. They were taking photographs from popular culture or from advertising and contextualizing them in another way. And this automatically brought a level of cultural critique or analysis about, power relations, about gender role or sexual identity, or about, the representation of class. So the starting point came from a desire to want to make political commentary, and I think it's a natural extension of that process that They Are Lost to Vision altogether is looking at the AIDS crisis through the lens of contemporary reporting, but also trying to connect these images of AIDS reporting back to other image systems. I'll use one example. I appropriate footage of Bette Davis in a movie called Dark Victory. And it's a kind of melodrama from the 30s where she is tragically going blind. And she's a kind of headstrong, narcissistic character who finds her humanity by going blind. And she's so brave, she doesn't tell her husband she's going blind. In the early days of AIDS, one of the main opportunistic infections was a thing called cytomegalovirus, which caused people to lose their vision. So the title of the piece, They Are Lost to Vision Altogether, has multiple meanings about this idea of seeing and the ability to see. Furthermore, in this movie, Dark Victory, I appropriate a moment when Bette Davis is talking to Ronald Reagan, who at that stage was a crappy B actor in lousy movies, not very good in the role. And so, I obviously was intending a kind of meta commentary by, appropriating footage from Bette Davis in the late 30s in a melodrama where Ronald Reagan is a supporting player, while at the same time I'm making a film and Ronald Reagan is now the president not commenting on AIDS. So there was a way by appropriating things, colliding things together, I could make commentary on things that would seem utterly unrelated. And this was very liberating. It made my work be able to move all over the place. I want to then just contrast, because the very last piece I show, which is called The Weight of Things, which was a video that was made for a band called The Gloaming. The Gloaming is, I'm friends with that band, and Thomas Bartlett is actually the pianist of that band. And that film, I was incredibly lucky. I found footage photographed in 1938 and 1939 available online through a person named Rick Prelinger, known very well to us. He had a thing called the Prelinger Collection, which you can now find online online at a site called archive.org, most of it in the public domain. Anyways, in 1938 and 1939, in a town called Britton, South Dakota, a man named Ivan Bess photographed some hours of home movies. And these movies just amazed me. It's this teeny town of a few thousand people, and he captures these kind of little quotidian moments of day-to-day life, people shoveling out after a snowstorm, or a farmer winning a prize for his pet pig, or a little boy wearing a Stetson staring at the camera. And there's something so touching about this vernacular footage, this vernacular imagery. And one of the things I've really always been moved by is this quote, which comes to us by the famous filmmaker who died actually last year, and scholar of film, Jonas Mekas. Jonas Mekas wrote in The Village Voice in 1963 about the beauty of vernacular film. He wrote, quote, "They see the beauty of sunsets taken by a Bronx woman when she passed through the Arizona desert. Travelogue footage, awkward footage that will suddenly sing with an unexpected rapture. The Brooklyn Bridge footage, the spring cherry blossom footage, the Coney Island footage, the Orchard Street footage. Time is laying a veil of poetry over them."
Oh my gosh.
There you go. That's why I use that footage.
Yeah, and that really, I think, leads to. I do want to talk more about process, but I feel that the question that really comes up after what you just said is, there are these themes that are consistent across all of the films, even the piece that you did for Jeffrey Bean. That and so I'd like to ask you what the role of nostalgia, longing, desire, lost, dreams, literature and film, which you've touched on a little bit, on your body of work, especially this collection of short films.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I think movies, it's been said a lot about the notion of utopia as, the place that doesn't exist, as utopos, the place that we long for and can never connect back to, and nostalgia obviously as a connection to that notion, which is a kind of physical returning to a place that one can't return to. And there's something really beautiful about the moving image because it's moving, because it's not a photograph I can hold in my hands. I mean, one of the things that really moves me about that Ivan Bess footage from The Weight of Things is the fact that I see it and it's gone. I see it and it's gone. And there's something about I see it and it's gone that, has to do with the experience of life I've had, to be really honest. You and I came of age in the mid-'80s. One of our very dearest friends, Lawrence Steger, who was a performance artist and collaborator, very significant collaborators of yours, died of AIDS in the 1980s. A loss that, life has never, a loss that brought the two of us even closer together, but a loss that still seems to mark our experience on Earth in a really profound way. So yeah, I think that one of the ways I want to share the burden of my experience of walking the earth is to try to get viewers to experience from my shoes what that loss feels like. And I often make work that makes people cry in my short work. And people say, I cried and I don't know why I cried. I was so moved and I don't understand why. So to me, that's a real sign of success in that work. I think my short work is different than my feature work. I think my feature work tends to be a bit more analytical, intellectual, historical. I hope someday to make a feature film that has the immediacy emotionally of my short films. But for whatever reason, I've always found it easier in the short work to make work that just spontaneously expresses my emotional state. And I think one of the reasons for that is because this idea of using other forms, music allows another form to express something. So the great part of the reason why I keep being interested in the collaboration with Thomas is he gives me tracks where instead of feeling like illustrating directly what's in the content of the lyrics, I'm trying to express the emotional logic of it. I'm trying to make you feel, even if you don't know who that dog is or who that woman is or the location I shot and you know nothing about it, the experiences feel three-dimensional.
Wow. Thank you so much. That's really a great, I don't even know what to say. It's so good. But no, because I think you really I think bringing in that idea of utopia, nostalgia, really just, I don't know. It's just, it's just beyond, beyond. But so I think the next thing I'd like to talk a little bit about is your process for some of these films, and also a little bit about the transition from, so much of your early work was shot on Super 8 film. And I think it'd be really interesting to people to understand how you transitioned from Super 8 to working digitally, and how that changed how you thought about what you did, maybe how you did it, and how it changed the way you edit and bring images together, and what kind of detriments maybe moving to digital had, but also the benefits as well.
Yeah. I mean, we have that history in common of being trained. A younger audience has no probably context for how the moving image was made in video or film if they didn't work with a film or video camera. In the early days of video art, there were porta-packs, which required you to carry a very heavy camera that was cabled to an actual portable video recorder. So that whole unit weighed maybe, 70 pounds. And in order to shoot in the field, it was exhausting. You'd shoot for 30 minutes and it was like going to the gym. It was so crazy. The flip side of that was shooting Super 8, 16 millimeter, or 35. No one shot 35 millimeter in our circle because it was incredibly expensive. And 16 was more connected to the avant-garde of the 1960s or 50s even, or even going further back, someone like Maya Deren or Warhol's work specifically. So I loved the grain and the image quality of film. And so Super 8 was all I could afford to shoot. And in those days, it was relatively cheap. I could buy, a 50-foot roll of Kodachrome or Tri-X or Plus X for about $8 or $9, and it cost about $8 or $9 to process it. So one roll of 3 minutes of footage, more or less, would cost me under $20.
Right.
I brought a Super 8 camera everywhere I went for years, probably from 1987 until 1997. For a decade, I photographed many hundreds, probably 200, 300 rolls of film. And I first would set up, I would, have someone come over and give them direction or stand in a certain way, or I would arrange the shots. As time went on, I just started photographing things that would happen in my life. And as I became more relaxed and skilled with the camera, I started being able to capture things with that camera. It's interesting because when I first started making the film, this kind of nostalgia, this veil of poetry was less prominent in Super 8. Because we saw Super 8 as another way of making the image. And then I kept shooting Super 8 as we moved to digital forms. And at the same time I shot Super 8, I shot things like High 8 or Mini DV, or eventually shooting on a DSLR. In the later part of the program, there's a film called Tigers. And Tigers comes from the stage of me moving between Super 8 and digital video. And at that point, I'm using the two mediums the same way. Like, I go out early morning to shoot the sunrise every day for like 3 months. And one of the things I was interested in is like photographing the deer in the dawn. I would go so early, I would wake the deer up. And I would get this moment where the deer would recognize me on camera, because you could see the deer see me on camera, and then not run. And that became interesting to record these little events of what it was like to just walk around in the world. And in the beginning, just collecting them without a purpose, not knowing how I would use them.
All right. Let's see here. I have a couple more questions. One thing I notice about, especially some of the more recent works, the work shot out in the Catskills, and that take place near your home, that have this kind of feel of domesticity. So a lot of the films are actually, shot close to home, at least a great part of them. And I just wonder how much the role of place plays, but also within that place, what's so important is the movement of light, especially in a lot of the time lapse, and sort of how you shift time with these things by using both slow motion footage and time lapse. And then also with some of the more recent works, we have multiple images up on the screen at the same time. So not only do we have the connection between edits, that juxtaposition, that collision of images, but we have more of these, images almost more like a collage or more like in conversation with one another at the same time. And I'm just wondering how you developed that, or how that developed for you, and what role all of these things have in your process.
Totally. I mean, one of the most important figures considering my work really, and still is such a deep influence on me, is Derek Jarman, another person who died of AIDS. I think if you look at Swoon and consider in Swoon my use of anachronism, or my desire to look back at a piece of period history and find within it queer relevance, I'm deeply influenced by movies like Edward II or Sebastian, or, any of his films, The Last of England. And also the sense that filmmaking could be both incredibly ravishingly beautiful and shockingly political. That those things were not mutually exclusive, that you could make something political that was gorgeous at the same time. So Derek Jarman, I think, is key. And if you look at the cottage that he made the film called The Garden in, he had a cottage in Dungeness, which fortunately actually has recently been preserved and will become a place that people can visit. And Craig, actually, lucky enough, got to visit that cottage when Derek was still alive. So yeah, I think that the sense of place in some ways is my hoping to carry on the example that Derek set, that you could make art out of the most intimate and mundane parts of your life, and that my subject matter could be huge and historic and outside myself, and my subject matter could be taken directly from life. I think that there's a natural reflection on time as you age. I think, in addition, after Larry died, you and I both had a number of friends and people who died from AIDS. And then the last years have brought other deaths. I lost my sibling, Bob. So the film called The Weight of Things is actually dedicated to him. And a number of very key collaborators like Therese Dupre, who was the production designer of Swoon, also died. So I think there's some attempt in some ways to actually really squeeze every drop out of time and life, and to actually pay attention and be completely present in what's happening, and whatever is happening, whether that's the movement of stars across the sky, or that's the death of people in the country from COVID, the giant political events we're going through. So yeah, I think that there's a kind of a sense of, by being very specific about what's happening in my life, in my world, I might be able to say something that other people could connect to, and that would also reflect in a bigger way on the walk that we're all doing on this globe, the experience we all have about living our bodies and living our experiences through time.
Wow. Well, maybe I'll just ask, one quick thing for you, Tom. Is there anything we didn't cover? We didn't really talk about 30 that much specifically. And then I also wonder if there's something you're working on now that you might want to discuss.
Yes, I would quickly say 30 was a pleasure. Jeffrey Bean, the fashion designer, saw Swoon. One day I went to my production office and I got this crazy, it was like Cartier stationery. I admit I'm superficial, so I knew what Cartier stationery was. I opened the letter up and it was like this incredibly fancy paper. And it was like, "Dear Tom Kalin, I don't know if you know who I am. Duh. I'm a fashion designer, Jeffrey Bean, and I've seen your movie like 8 times. Would you have lunch with me?" I immediately called him up and was like, "Yes, I know who you are." And it was amazing. He basically gave me absolute freedom to make a film honoring his 30th anniversary. For a couple weeks we spent together, he showed me all of his clothing and taught me a lot. Much of what I understand about fashion and the construction of clothes comes from that time with him. And it was an incredible honor. I got to, have Vivica Lindfors, a very well-known Swedish actress, performing in one of her last roles. And I got to have Claire Danes, who at that stage was a teenager, in one of her first roles in a film together. So the Jeffrey Bean film was an incredible honor. I am now working on I'm going to actually tonight start cutting on a new short film from music. Thomas Bartlett has recorded a new album's worth of music. I've already made one video for it that's not been released yet. It's stop motion animation. My first very, kind of intense experience making stop motion animation. And this is a video Thomas has photographed. I'm not in New York City. I'm upstate in the Catskills. Like many people, I have immune issues and health issues that make me have to stay away from COVID. And Thomas has photographed all this very striking footage of the empty streets of New York City. So I'm going to make a film for the first time that I didn't photograph the footage of. Thomas is actually the cinematographer. And so that'll be interesting. It's, again, just extending our collaboration into other areas. So that's what I'll be working on, is a new short film tonight.
Excellent. All right. I think that's a good place to stop.
Yes, and thank you for fitting in that last question and answer. That was really great to hear.
A pleasure. And Suzie, thank you so much. It's such an honor to have you with me. I adore your work. I encourage all the viewers who don't know Suzie Silver's work to Google her and find her website and take a look at her incredible body of work, which is especially, among other things, is her film called Freebird, which is, among many films, a film that will change your life when you see it.
All right. Thank you
Bye,
so
everyone.
much. It's been such
Bye.
a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Suzie.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
An honor. Bye.